Well, hello and welcome back to Read Becca. It's time once again for my weekly chatty catch up on everything I've read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading, as well as some general lifey chit chat and catch up. And this week was a really at opposite ends of the spectrum reading week, I think, because very high and very low, very low. So let's start with the positive, be optimistic. And I finished right after I filmed pretty much last week, the high point for our week. And that was Falling Back in Love with Being Human by Thom. This author is someone I knew of previously. Thom is Canadian Chinese, trans femme, very outspoken and vocal queer activist, I would say. And I knew that I was going to kind of get very poetic writing, but this is framed more as letters. However, I would say these are just poems pretty much. So I'm not a huge poetry reader, but I loved this collection. I thought it was so good. It has a sense of exploring identity through writing these letters, though they are at points framed from Thom's perspective personally, framed as directed at the reader, sometimes directed at specific individuals or groups. And there were just lines that hit me so hard throughout this that it was just standout lines every which way. And I think I could return to this collection as well because of that. So things that will stick with me are like, your body is not an invitation to violence. And it's from a very personal perspective, but also instructive to the reader, talking about the problems that the author has gone through in the past and the ways to demand more out of the world for yourself. And I think that this collection had the right balance for what I needed in the moment of starting very sort of angry, starting with the things that are harms that have been done and wrongs, and then working toward more empathy and sympathy and optimism and the hope that we have. And I think that balance was really perfect. So I did actually listen to this on audiobook, and I would say that's really the way to consume it, or immersive read, do both the audio and the writing, if you really want to get into the text, because I think I would do that if I read it again, because so much of this is almost like spoken word poetry. One of the poems is just the phrase "I forgive you" in different inflections, and so that kind of, I don't even know how that would totally work in writing versus hearing it. And that seems like something very abstract that I wouldn't have liked, but I wound up actually liking that one quite a bit, oddly, because of the way that inflection was used. So I think this was a standout poetry collection. I really loved it. I loved all of the themes that it explored and the emotional notes that really connected with me in the moment right now. The next thing, we'll go to the mid, I guess, book. And that's Sheine Lende by Darcie Little Badger. This is sort of a prequel novel after Lazarus. And Darcie Little Badger is an Indigenous author who writes kind of fantasy in contemporary or near contemporary settings. And I would say this series, Lazarus and Sheine Lende, are probably closest to urban fantasy. They definitely have all of the elements of urban fantasy, but they feel a little different because they're not in like a major city. So they don't have the urban aspect, but they have everything else. And they also feel a little different because so much is incorporated from Indigenous background and things like having a connection to the environment and to things like ghost dogs, like this bond with deceased animals and a ability to communicate with that. So for this book, I think what did work was the very beginning, where we are with Shane, aka Sheine Lende. She goes by Shane because no one can pronounce her name right, or finds it weird. And so she has just sort of normalized that she's Shane. She is, I think, 17. She's an older teen, but read much younger for me, and that has been a constant as well through all of Darcie Little Badger's books for me, though not in a way that, like, she's an annoying little child or anything. She just reads, like, much younger, however, has the freedom of a much older child. So I would say this is easily readable for someone on the very young end of YA, and that's where this is kind of slotted. But Shane is the child of a tracker. And people in her area have started going missing very suddenly out of nowhere, and they're just sort of poof, disappearing. And so her tracker mom has been off looking for these people and trying to help find them, and Sheine ends up getting caught up in that. So that all sounds very propulsive, and that's how it started. And then as she's figuring out what's going on, things go wrong, of course, as they do, and it turned into this very rambling, meandering thing where she's traveling all over the place, and she's trying to get more information by going somewhere far-flung to a specialist, and it just lost the thread of the plot, I think, and lacked focus. And I think that's what lost me. But also that is very typical of urban fantasy as well, that it just sort of jumps here and there. And that's not something that works for me as much usually, and is why I tend to not love urban fantasy, really. So I think this was fine, and I read the whole thing, and I enjoyed the reading experience, but it didn't blow me away. And I do kind of wish it had been shorter and more focused, because it just went on so long. At the point where I was getting to the end, I was like, what even is going on anymore with this story? I don't know. So I was liking all of these little individual elements of it, and I love the innovation. So much of it is really fresh in terms of the world building and the style that it's told in, but I just really needed it to stay on course, and it did not at all. So that was difficult to keep reading with it. Then we have my two massive duds. These were both a real fail. I had 2 one-star reads this week, and a major problem that I will start with addressing both of is sourcing and citation. Nonfiction, you need to have some sourcing and citation, and I have a real issue with nonfiction that does not. So both of these are fairly short books, so I would expect to see that with both of them are very thorough because they don't require a whole huge amount. However, Setting the World on Fire, The Brief Astonishing Life of St. Catherine of Siena by Shelley Emling first, has no sourcing or citation whatsoever, even for direct excerpts and quotes. That's a massive problem to me. It also has a selected bibliography rather than a full bibliography, and I find that not okay. That's just not acceptable. So that's a problem, number one. And then Thomas Jefferson and the Tripoli Pirates, The Forgotten War That Changed American History by Brian Kilmeade and Don Yeager. Likewise, this has a little better bibliography to it, slightly better. It does have some citations, but almost exclusively for actual quotes and excerpts, not for any of the text of the book, or for very, very little of it. So it was really sparse on that aspect. So both of these, I was really disappointed with that element. But let's talk about the actual books themselves. So Setting the World on Fire. I was really looking forward to hearing about Catherine of Siena. Catherine was a weird, sort of unusual figure for her time in kind of the mid-1300s. Because she was very independent. She found her way to independence, or she forced her way to independence through her religious stance, and the things that she did in pursuit of that were pretty extreme, and she somehow gained reverence and awe and respect as a religious figure in her lifetime before she died and was sainted, despite being a woman who didn't really have a place in the world in that area, who in that time there weren't a lot of options for, and could never learn to read or write even because of her status as a woman. And yet she wrote a book. She dictated a book, and it was published after she died. Unfortunately, she died very young, tragically. But her life was so fraught with problems. And one of the things that I didn't like about this book is that I felt there was a lot there that I had to read between the lines to sort of understand. And I think possibly in part that maybe because she is a religious figure, the church often sanitizes documentation about people who don't have the best documentation there. And so this felt more like religious history than it did the purported biography. I lost all sense of her humanity or anything depicting her as an actual person beyond about age 12. And even that before in her childhood, it's very, very sparse. So I don't know, because the lack of references and discussion of sourcing, whether that was due to what is still available in terms of biographical detail, based on the church controlling that information, or what, or if that's just the framing that this author chose. But I felt the author had such a strong sense of awe and wonder for her that it came across very unbalanced, really strongly unbalanced, because I'm sitting here reading her story kind of in horror. And the framing of the book is wonder. And so it was really jarring to read and feel that dissonance. Because Catherine, as a very, very young person, espoused these ideas of being really, really connected to service, to the Lord. And at 7 years old, was claiming that she had promised her virginity to Jesus. And the book is, again, in awe of that, and like, what a great thing that is, and how unusual that would be in that time. But me, as a modern day reader looking at that, the level of indoctrination, first of all, to think of that at 7 is wild. But a 7-year-old fundamentally cannot understand what that means when they're saying it, not to the fullness of understanding. And so to look at that, that's just horrifying. But it only gets worse from there as far as, like, her story is really difficult, really, really difficult. You can see as she is starting to get slightly older, so the marrying age was around 12 to 13. So there was this expectation, and her path was lined up for her at 12 to 13 to be on the marriage market. And she cut off all her hair because she didn't want that. And that is perceived by the book to indicate that she was so committed to the service of Christ and to this promise she had made as a 7-year-old, when all I can see is someone who wants their independence, someone who doesn't want the only path that is available to them, really, as a woman, being shipped off to marry someone against their wishes for the benefit of their family. And I actually was really reminded of The Marriage Portrait, which is in a sort of similar time and setting about a young girl who is married off to the powerful Medici family. And there's a lack of individuality or control over her life because she, as an entity, is just an extension of her family. And that really is the vibe that you get for the young girl, is that the family views her as a component part of them and not as her own self. And she clearly wants to be her own self and is very strong-willed. And so I do find wonder in the fact that she found a way to forge a path to be a single individual, to have respect, and even like the Pope turned to her for information at certain times. Like, really, really interesting course for her life. But the path and the things that she was doing, the motivation she was having, are not inspiring awe in me. I think it was a deeply fractured, mentally ill, physically ill state that she was trying to survive through. So she, after having cut off all her hair to avoid this marriage, she ends up, her family fire their servant, and they force her to be their servant from then on. So, like, she's experiencing just real oppression in her life. And then the weird religious things start happening to her, where, to me, as a modern day reader looking at that, things are very much snowballing in terms of her mental health. But that's not even acknowledged. Like, I really needed that to be acknowledged, because we're seeing over and over at multiple points through her life, she will have a sudden episode that other people will see, something strange happen to her, and then she behaves like a different person. And so that sounds very much like mental health conditions. I wouldn't pose a diagnosis or anything, but certainly that's a thing that does happen to people when they're having mental health breaks. But things like her having a vision or hallucination, and there are people there and she's the only one seeing it. That's a pretty obvious problem, but yet they are viewing that with awe and wonder, and taking it seriously. And so she is taken seriously for all those things, but there's no acknowledgement of the impact on her as a person, really. She had really horrific health issues that seem to be digestive, and so she always has problems with eating. And that really seems to feed into, that seems to lead her to really embrace the idea of holy anorexia of the time. That was very common, unfortunately, during that time, where there was almost this euphoria surrounding extreme fasting. And that was pretty typical in sort of monasteries. And I mean, it still is in these ascetic types of religious practice where it's about self-denial. And she went beyond that. She was known to just not eat, basically, and live on herbs and small amounts of bread. And she would have really, again, euphoric reactions to taking the Eucharist. And so all of that, to me, like, yeah, that was a lot because of her having these really severe physical issues, obviously. At one point, I think it was her brother described the fact that her whole body would become bloated visibly when she would eat normally. And so, like, she's dealing with really awful stuff as a person, and I'm having to read between the lines to get at that, really, because this is not acknowledging that that is sort of the root of why she's then having all of these mental issues. But then it just keeps spiraling and getting worse. And she eventually is doing all these things that she's being heralded for being so good and so helpful and selfless. And yet all I could see in that story was self-harm. She takes things to an extreme to punish herself for any desire of comfort, basically. There's one point where, like, there's a woman who nobody wants to help because she smells so bad because she has an open sore on her body. And Catherine goes to help her, and she's heralded as so selfless in doing that, but she's doing it because it's miserable. She forces her face onto the woman's sore and holds it there. She drinks the water that she used to clean the sore until she's basically sick, and just forces herself, punishes herself in really extreme ways. And so there are elements of self-harm, really, really severe beyond that throughout her life. And so all I could see was that in just trying to humanize her, that she had a lot going on and it built. I could see the progression of it over her life, even trying to fill in gaps. So the shape of her life was this very high control situation and her trying to find individuality. And she sort of did. And I think that she became this very powerful woman. But it feels sad to me to read about that, the way she achieved that, because it took so much hurt on her part. It was so difficult for her. And she died at 33 as this young woman who should have sort of had healthcare, medical care, and mental health care, and lived a long life. And instead she spent her entire teens and adulthood abusing herself, and that viewed as good by the church. And it just is so heartbreaking to me. So I think I had multiple problems with this, but I think Catherine's story in general is a compelling and interesting one. I just think I'm more likely now that I've read this one, I'm more likely to want to turn toward Sigrid Undset's biography of her, which was sourced in this, because I think that one is a little bit more, has better veracity of the content. So I will be curious to see if I pick that one up, if it's significantly different. But the other severe disappointment was Thomas Jefferson and the Tripoli Pirates, The Forgotten War That Changed American History by Brian Kilmeade and Don Yeager. This has been on my TBR for ages because it's a topic that is very interesting to me. And this book was so poorly written. It was just really bad. It's written very, very simply, in really plain, simple language. And that could be fine. I don't have a problem with that necessarily, but it's also written in a way that feels a lot like children's history, though it's not quite at that level. But when you read children's history, very often you can feel the gaps. You can feel that it's just jumping over a lot of stuff to get you to the main points. And that's what this feels like. It feels like it's more holes than story. And it's also written in a very emotive, bombastic, extreme, like hyperbolic way. So everything is like strong or weak, and everything is about action. and not about what I thought this was going to be about. Like, there is no sense of what's going on politically or strategically in this at all. Nothing whatsoever. And I think if I didn't have foreknowledge of Jefferson, I would have thought he was really dumb coming out of this. Like, at one point, we get a single line mentioning that Jefferson has been working at diplomacy for like over a decade. And then we're getting just pages and pages of this sailor rambling on about how the situation is so bad because the US is requiring peace. And that's really handcuffing him in what he can do because he can't just attack, and like how everything would be better if he could just blow people up. And it was very grating on my nerves right now because that feels really timely with everything going on in the world, and I just couldn't take that being the thing that's focused on here. And that was over and over and over. It just harped on that just how limiting it was and how they wanted to fight. And there were so many strange elements to that, though, because they want to fight because they're so obviously going to win because they have the greatest forces and such a large navy with the highest tech. And yet, as they're deriding the Tripoli pirates, the Barbary pirates forces, their states have less, but they keep beating them. like the US Navy keeps losing ships to them, keeps being robbed. Like, they keep being overcome by smaller forces, by less technically advanced, and yet that dissonance is never acknowledged. It's always, well, it was luck, they just happen to have great luck every time. It can't be that they're actually skilled and know what they're doing more than these sort of inexperienced, the first navy of the US, This is not that long after the US was established. So it was very frustrating to read because it's so at odds with itself and not intellectually honest about anything. And it was not the book that I expected. And I think that's thematically true for both of these. Like, I expected a biography. This wasn't really a biography. It wasn't very humanizing or self-aware. This one, I was expecting a lot of strategy and a lot of what was going on politically and diplomatically. And this book doesn't care about diplomacy at all. This was all about the sailors in the Navy and what they were doing to take action and be strong in the face of a foreign conflict, and skipped over all of the diplomacy and peacemaking and establishment of what the US wanted to be in a conflict. And so, yeah, I just really, really struggled with both for those reasons. So these were complete failures for me. Anyway, man, oh man, this is going to be a long one again. So what I'm reading right now, I started 3 Bags Full by Leonie Swan for March Mystery Madness. I am working on Queen Victoria's Mysterious Daughter, a biography of Princess Louise, and Fall or Dodge in Hell by Neil Stevenson. I have started my mammoth. That means I win at March of the Mammoths. So we're succeeding. I think that's all the books. So on to what I watched this week. I continued on with my watching of the Predator cycle of movies and watched Predators, the, I think, 2010 movie. So the first of the kind of modern films, and finally we get an actually good one. I did quite like this one. I don't know why, but for some reason, the framing, I think, just made it so much better. And that is that in this one, we have a bunch of individuals who don't know each other. They just end up waking up, dropped in, parachuted into a jungle. And immediately at the beginning, you find that all of them are sort of like elite killers from different parts of the world. And so it being predators, we obviously know there's sort of a hunting aspect. Aliens. The predators are these alien beings who can hunt via heat signature. It's definitely sort of sci-fi horror thriller. And so they have been dropped in this jungle for fun, for the predators to hunt. And so that makes it very effective for some reason compared to the previous ones. I'm not sure why, but it definitely kept me engaged. Because I have so ridiculously disliked the first 2, I was prepared to drop this one, and I actually liked it enough to watch the whole thing. It was much more interesting and entertaining for sure. So I think I'm now to the actually like really good ones next. next, I believe. I think Prey and Badlands are the next ones, and people generally seem to like those. So hopefully we'll be on to those ones soon, maybe not in the next week, but soonish. Then I watched a documentary, The Hobby. This was fantastic. I don't know that I have a ton to say about it. It's a documentary about board gaming. And so we start with a guy who is a specialist in ancient board games, like ancient Mesopotamia, that sort of thing, and talks a little bit about that. And then we get into more modern board gaming and the different types of engagement with modern board gaming, and the move from the kind of board games that everybody knew to this massive expansion that has happened in board gaming in recent years. And then the kind of culture around it. So people who are sort of influencers and involved in YouTube, making sort of content around board gaming, and the ways that the community of board gaming interacts, like Gen Con is covered. And they have a very big section about the World Series of board gaming, which I didn't even know existed. But of course, they have a World Series of board gaming in Las Vegas, where people who are really, really competitive can go and play to be the best. And so that was really fun and entertaining, very, very nerdy. Like, the people are definitely nerds that are involved, and yeah, I'm totally one of them. So it was enjoyable to watch for sure. Then I also finished a series, Harlan Coben's Lazarus. Not anything to do with the biblical figure. The guy's name is just Lazarus. And it's about a psychiatrist whose father is also a psychiatrist. And he starts looking into his father's death, which was reported to be a suicide, but he suspects it was not. And the reason he suspects that is because when he's in his author's study, he has started seeing ghosts. And in many cases, they're sort of replaying a scene a conversation they had with his father. The whole premise sounds a little wonky. It's very like Deus Ex Machina, that he's getting all this information from ghosts, like, I'm not sure how much that actually works. And I don't know that I loved the show, but it was compelling enough and like thrilling enough that I definitely wanted to keep going. But he's kind of ridiculous as a character. And I feel like a lot of those type of unhinged professional that's investigating types of stories have that same problem for me, where like you'll have a cop who's very altered because of drugs or alcohol or whatever, or they're just having a mental break. You often have that trope, and so this was kind of that in an interesting new way that I haven't seen before, even though I don't really like that trope at all. But I needed a distraction, and this was a good distraction. I think it kept me going. And I realized there are actually a load of Harlan Coben adaptations that I haven't seen that are out there. I have never read any of his books. I should really read his books because I tend to like at least the adaptations. But yeah, anyway. So I think that's everything that I've finished watching this week. Otherwise, the week has been the week. The US is a disaster right now. I think that has strongly been getting to me. I think I mentioned last week that I was feeling like a very low week. This week was also a very low week, and it really just has been getting to me. And the weather was really, really terrible. So it was raining, and I had canceled plans because of the rain, because it was just pouring most of the week, or storming a lot. Thankfully, we did not get hit by any like tornadoes or anything, but I'm very much in Tornado Alley. And we've had really extreme temperature swings. So it's been like 80 to 30, which is like 80 is summer weather. And it's been very, very warm some days, and then wildly cold other days. So yeah, it's ridiculous. And just maintaining, I don't even know. So with everything that is going on right now, we in the US politically, I feel that the effort is to desensitize and get us to not have empathy. And I think I'm happy in that I feel I'm seeing people have more empathy, as the efforts of those in power are to just go along and accept that, well, we're at war, things are going to be bad, just accept that things are going to be bad. And I think that's a tactic that is about getting us to ignore that in more areas than just us doing the wrong thing and actively committing war crimes, though that's not a first for this administration in the US, unfortunately. They have been doing that multiple times before now. Crimes against humanity as well, beyond war crimes. So I feel that in conversations I've had this week, I am seeing empathy continue, and it's not working. The desensitization, the distraction is not working, but it is very difficult to not be sort of buried and feel a little bit of a depression because of just how bad and how immense all of it is all of the time. And to not be able to directly do anything about it is very hard to, other than just, having that continued empathy and knowing that we're doing horrible things and being aware as much as I can, and continuing to see a future where we do better. And I think a lot of people are becoming really, really aware, and that's great. That's what's going to get us to that future where we decide to do better. So anyway, that was a rant. I apologize. Anyway, so I think that, because of that, all of that, I didn't do a lot this week. So nothing exciting. Cancellations because of weather, because of not feeling like doing anything. I literally have just read, pretty much. I did also start Bridgerton, so I'm sure I will probably be finished with that in a couple days, because I was saving it for when I really, really was feeling bad and needed a serious escape. And so I started the new season of Bridgerton that just came out, or it's been out for, I think, over a month now. And actually, I think part 2 might have come out already, because they release it in 2 chunks usually. So I think it's all out, available now. Anyway, so I enjoyed the first couple episodes that I watched as is. What else? I think that's all. We're gonna wrap it up. So I have a couple of recommendations for those who are still here. I apologize. This is gonna be so long and so hard to edit. My 2 recommendations for the week. The first is a fantastic kind of informative video on why Gen Alpha can't read, from Eclectic Reads, who has a PhD in lit and teaches in this area. So this is sort of a somewhat expert or skilled person in this area talking on the topic. And I think it was not just an opinion piece. It was an informative, really useful video, I think. The other is 10 times the Hugos got it wrong, from Alistair is Reading. And Alistair is a relatively new channel who is just about to hit 100 subscribers. So go subscribe and watch the video and knock Alistair over, because I am very into the Hugos, though I don't know that I agreed with all of Alistair's takes on which ones should have won versus which ones shouldn't have won. But I love the idea of that video, and it was really fun because I do very much enjoy and follow the Hugo Awards, which are kind of the major sci-fi and fantasy awards, one of the biggest. So anyway, that is my week for this week. Man, I talked way too much, but it feels good. It feels cathartic to check in with you all, to connect with my people in my community in the bookish world. And so, as always, I hope you have a wonderful week in reading and in life, and thank you so very much for being here.